I'm going to walk you through how I turn Excel files into super cool looking Notion pages for my clients that has ultimately saved me about 10 hours a week, maybe 20 hours a week. And this is all done with AI and automation. So let's jump in. So this is the actual final report. This is a sample. The one I create is actually much larger and has many more sections. But you can see it has these super cool graphs. These are images and interesting observations about the data. And the grouping is a little different. So this one's grouped by daily data, and this is grouped by monthly data. And I'll walk through what this data actually is in a second. But let me show you what it started as. So it starts as this Excel file, and this is a screenshot, just so I can easily show it. And this data is an export from a LinkedIn profile that includes daily impressions and engagement. Right now, I'm just going to focus on impressions just to keep it simple. But the idea is you could blow this out of the water and create super extensive reports. But I really just want to show you the building blocks of it, at least the pieces I put together that have worked for me to create this. And then you can do so much more with it. So let's jump in the actual automation. So it should be this is a light version, even though it's pretty extreme. This is actually the light version of the full version. So the full version, do I have a screenshot of it? Oh yeah, here we go. So the full version is super extreme, and this is just one report. And a lot of this is just copied over and over again. So you can see the building blocks are very similar, just like getting data, um, doing stuff with it. And I'll run through each of these steps. And it's just analyzing the data in different ways. But we're gonna stick with I just pulled out a couple pieces here just to kind of walk through. And really, I think we're just gonna go through the middle one here to show the monthly report. And let's start from the left. So Make has what we call a webhook. And if you're not familiar with Make or webhooks, the general idea is Make has a bunch of modules and it connects to a bunch of different APIs, different data sources, different operations. You can do all these super interesting things without needing to code or very low code. I don't think this uses really any code or very basic code. You use the principles of code, I guess. But the main idea here is something called a webhook, and this webhook is one of Make's way to trigger an event. There's lots of different ways to trigger event. For example, you could have it watch in your email, and every time an email comes in, it triggers a scenario. So this one's a more interesting one. It's called a webhook, and the webhooks really just sit there and wait for data to ping this URL. So it gives you the specific URL, and you send this URL data, and once it receives data, it starts the scenario running. And to do this, for this case, I've set up a simple little Notion database because Notion gives us the option to create a little button and we can run automations with it. So if you're not familiar with Notion, Notion is a project management tool, CRM. You can kind of make whatever you want with it. It's very similar to Monday, very similar to ClickUp. I've just used Notion forever, so I love Notion. And um, this specific database that I set up super simple. Our actual client database has like hundreds of clients and hundreds of entries, and each one is like a report. And we just connect the report to so this is the LinkedIn data export. So it's just a file, and I download the file, but that would be a file, and I attach the file, and then I can do kind of whatever I want with it. So again, Notion allows us to create these custom buttons, and the buttons now can do automation. So this was a newer feature in Notion that I love. And let me open up the button here. So the button automation pretty much is when the buttons click, do something. And the cool thing is we can actually call a webhook within the Notion button. So the Notion button will call this webhook. And if you look at the URL, you can see I got the URL from right here from the webhook. So this will trigger the webhook. calls this URL, and it sends it data. And I'm just sending all the data. You can send whatever data you want. But I'm just going to send all the data, and it includes our Excel file. Let me mark that one done. So if I were to push this button, it would trigger this scenario. Actually, let me just uh, link this, run it, and we actually should just be able to see it. Let's try it. It ran, and it ran. So you can see we didn't get to see all the cool animations because it is just the single webhook, so it ran immediately and was done. But you can see we can see what the source was and then what data we got. And usually when I'm building the scenarios, I'm going kind of step by step to see like what properties I'm getting if I'm curious, and so I can reuse them for the future steps. We can see that we got the name. If we click in the properties a little bit, and here's our plain text. We got our data export. This comes as a URL, which I'm going to get into in a second because this was a pain to deal with. And the URL is the location of the file, like AWS server. And any other information you would send would come through here. We also had status here down here. So the cool thing is now we can do whatever we want with that data in here. So hopefully you kind of can picture what you would potentially want to use. Like even if you had a Notion database with a bunch of interesting information, maybe you have sales information, client information, like you can run queries on it and then display that data, analyze the data through Make and display it in any way you want to. But this is just one way to do it. Again, there's a million different ways to do it. This is just sort of a few of the puzzle pieces to get you there. So let's reconnect this. All right, now the fun part. Now we're going to run through the actual scenario here. And the first step, once we get the data, is we have our HTTP request. And this is because, if you remember, we got our URL was a string back here. So if I dig in real deep, this should always be the same. If I dig in really deep here, we get the URL. And really, I just want to make sure, this is a quick filter. If you're not familiar with filters, this really just will check and say like, does something exist? Continue. If not, don't continue. So I'm just saying, URL is required. Make sure the URL is required, which, again, dug in deep to get to that URL. It'll always be the same structure. So I can assume it's going to be the same structure. Say don't continue if it's not there. And now we actually have to get the file. So Excel files are extremely hard to work with in Make, or at least I had a hard time finding any good resources for managing Excel files. If anyone found anything, please throw it in the comments or send me a message because I had a pain working with them. But I love working with Google Sheets. So I figured out a way to convert the Excel doc to a Google Sheet. And I think this is something that a lot of people aren't doing. A lot of either people aren't running to the scenario or like they haven't had a need to, or they're doing some roundabout way because I could not find many options or many resources or people solving this problem. So I think this is an interesting way to get this to work, and it also creates sort of a backup of the data, which is nice. So I'm pretty much getting the file with our HTTP module, and this just it'll go get the file, and then it turns into like base64 encoded data, and then we can do whatever we want with it. So we're just pulling up the Google Drive module. And then we're saying, let's move the file or let's upload the file to an actual specific location. So I just have this test example. And then I'm choosing my file as the get a file module. It really only lets you pick the specific modules that you're able to pick from. So this says actual like base64 file is the output of this module. Now, the cool thing about the Google Drive upload option is you can convert the file into a Google Drive file, which is extremely powerful. So I'm saying convert this file. This is where the magic was happening. Convert this file from an Excel file to a Google spreadsheet. And then once it does that, you now have the Google spreadsheet to easily run any of the kind of typical module commands on the Google spreadsheet, which is super cool. So, this uploads as a Google spreadsheet, and now you can see like the future ones I'm pulling from the spreadsheet. So my massive one, I'm uploading it once, and then you can see a lot of this is just querying data. A lot of these are just querying data from this Google spreadsheet in different ways. So, I want different pages in these. I want different columns, rows, to get different data, analyze it, show interesting information. But I just need to get the file once, and then once I have it, I can run commands like crazy. So once I have that, I have this router, and this router really is just starting to split everything into our different sections. And again, we have sort of this first section with our daily impressions. So it's just mapping out daily impressions. And our next one, which is monthly impressions, again, mapping out monthly impressions. So once we get our data, we can then pull in the specific column data, like row data, like cell data from the sheet. So I say, okay, now give me the spreadsheet. This was the file ID from our Google Drive. Again, this file just got created. It went to a folder somewhere in Google Drive that I specified. Same as the Excel file, converted to a spreadsheet, the actual MIME type spreadsheet. It doesn't exactly matter. I really just want the file ID because I'm saying just go get the spreadsheet. Go give me the spreadsheet. So I get the spreadsheet. And then the rest of this is really just based off the spreadsheet. So I'm saying, give me this, and this is again screenshot of the actual sheet because that was easier. Give me the engagement page, sorry, sheet or tab. What do they call them in Excel? I don't even know. The engagement sheet. I think it's called a sheet in Google Sheets. Sheet, and then give me row, uh, column one. Correct. Sorry, column A, row one. In this case, two, because we have a header, and then go all the way down to C 366. This is 365 days of data. Now, for me, all of our data is staying the same, so it's we don't necessarily have to like change anything here, but you know, if you had to get a little more creative with creating, checking ranges, checking if data exists, obviously you'd need to introduce that logic. The rest of this doesn't necessarily matter. I didn't change anything here. Formatted value, formatted string. But this is really just getting my data. So the output of this would be pretty much this data here. This whole 365 days of data from our sheet. So once we have that data, the output. Actually, let's just run this real quick. Let me unlink this. I'll just run it. Run it. Create report. All right, here we go. So now we can see that what happened here. So we got our data from our webhook. We got the basics for our actual file. Create the Google Drive spreadsheet. Then it went and retrieved the data from that specific sheet. And the output is going to be a bunch of bundles, I'm guessing 365 bundles of data. And each one of those is our impressions, engagement, data. So our date, impressions, engagement, some extra info about the sheet. So now what do you do with all these bundles? So you get all these bundles from Make, and then now you have to actually aggregate them to something. So the aggregators really just run through all that data and you do something with the data. So let me talk about the strategy a little bit, and then I'll say how I got there. So I didn't feel like organizing all that data with logic. And nowadays, OpenAI is very, very cheap and works great. So I just throw it to OpenAI and say, here's a bunch of information or here's a bunch of data, group it for me so I don't have to. And that's pretty much what I did. So this was an OpenAI module. And if you haven't used it before, it's amazing because you can use it kind of however you want. I'm using uh, the most recent model. It's one of the least expensive, fastest ones that I found works. I think the O1, that's too expensive for the basic stuff I'm doing. You could go down and use some of the other ones, but I don't know. Feel like this one works great for me because there's a little logic in some of these. Because I do say, create. Here's a data set contains daily engagement impressions. Here's the columns, and then here's what I want it to do. Here are the steps. Create a sum of the impressions data by month, engagement data. But then here's some interesting things. So I actually only wanted full months because what would happen is you'd see our graph, and then the graph would end up going to, go up, 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 and then all of a sudden the last month it would drop because our data we only had like half that month's of data, and so it was always me just adding notes like, "Don't worry about the last month," I'd have to go in and like edit it. So with this, I don't actually have to do that. I can just say, don't show any incomplete months. And OpenAI is smart and figures it out, which is great. And then I would say add a note if there aren't. So I did throw that in sometimes to the client, like just saying, hey, this isn't a full month. And then I give the structure of what I'm looking for. So I want to return a JSON object. And it shows, and I have it and I have this actually a specific way because of the next piece for the graphing. And I don't want this to come back as an array, which you'd normally want to come back as. I actually need it formatted as a string with a comma separated string, and that's because of the graph we're going to use. So again, I'm leaning a little bit more on OpenAI, more and more. I think a lot of us are to structure some of this data because I don't want to set up all the logic to have to do this. So this is like a pain to have to like go through all this. This probably costs like 0.000. We use OpenAI so much, like so much, and I feel like our daily bill's like a few dollars. It's like, and I feel like we use it like crazy. Um, so I usually lean on like if it can do it, I'll have it do it. And then the return. So I just have to say, return a JSON object because this module actually requires you. So if you have to actually say that you're returning a JSON object, and if you do the advanced, if I don't have the advanced, it won't show up. If I do advanced, the response format, I can choose text or JSON. So I choose JSON and I say return a JSON object. It actually has to be written out somewhere in the prompt. And then I say yes, that I want to parse it. So this gives me something usable in the next module. All right, so that's what I'm looking for. So that means the data, the table aggregator, I really just have to pull all the data out of it. And as you saw, I used it in the prompt, but the aggregator is just I'm using the table aggregator because it'll organize it for the prompt. So then I can pass over the prompt and it really just it'll just print out the text as the table, and then ChatGPT knows what to do with it. Or sorry, OpenAI knows what to do with it. So I aggregate the table. I say, give me the date, impressions, engagement. I say what the column separator is. I say what I want it to be. So I want this to be a new row every time. So it's going to go bump, 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 bump. I'll put the data. And then as you saw, this takes forever to load. As you saw at the bottom, it just pretty much says, here's the data. And then it would be a very long list of, 365 rows pretty much, or like new lines of data. All right, so what does that do then? It goes over to this outputs that structure that I showed, and I'm going to run it here in a minute so you can see the actual structure. But then this kicks over to this graphing tool that I really like. There's a lot of options. This one was free, or at least free for what I needed. If you're going to use it a bunch, it might be more expensive, but this was free for what I needed. It's called Quick Chart IO. Um, I think the pricing's like, yeah, you can do free as long as it's like rate limited, but I think as long as you're doing basic stuff. So for what I needed, it was super, super basic and easy to throw together. But if you use this chart maker, you can create these charts and then it gives you a URL that you can send to data, and then it just creates an image of the chart. So it's super cool, super easy to create. So you can, style all the different, change your colors, change the types, um, the layouts, how big it is, the bar, the actual, like the data, the type of chart it is. And then when you're ready, you go to where am I going here? Charge system, go away. You go, yeah, here we go. Like, where did it go? You go save it as API template, and it gives you this URL. And this URL you can use. You send it data, and then it'll actually create your graph. And I think the URL disappear. Oh yeah, here you go. So the URL disappear after 60 days if you don't use it. Something to keep in mind, but we're running these constantly, and they're like super easy to put together. I think I'm using most of the defaults. I think I changed some colors, and that was about it. But otherwise, you just send it the data. You say, here's the data. You send it the numbers. If I go to this image, or if I go to this URL, it's the image of the chart, which is super cool. So you can download it. You can do whatever you want with it. So it's awesome. So if you want to, there's like a paid plan. So if you're going crazy on it, you're creating tons, you might need to the paid plan, but we haven't hit those limits at all. So again, I just need to structure the data. So you can see like the comma separated data is what it expects. So that's what I did in OpenAI. So instead of like me going and creating all these, I probably would have had, I don't know, 8 more modules in here of logic, which again, that's not, I was in a hurry. And then I was like, oh, this is actually pretty easy. And then I was like, oh, this works better. And I trust it more than potentially doing it in any other way. So the data set goes in here. So this is just comma separate data for every month. So remember, we grouped it by month. This one we grouped the data by month. So the output was give me the months comma separated, and give me the associated date comma separated. So this is the sum of the impressions comma separated. Where do we go? Here's our data. There we go. Looks a little better. So it says give me the months, and I show the example. Give me the engagement totals. You can see it's a string of those comma separated. Give me the impression totals, comma separated, and then any data notes that I asked for, which are just if it was a complete month or not. All right, and then what was next? And then impressions, monthly impressions. Yeah, so then we have our graph, and then this is where was the next bottleneck I ran into, and hopefully this is helpful to someone. But I realized that Notion, and I'm assuming other tools, didn't like the image of this because it does Notion specifically. This didn't have a like .png in it, which is an annoying Notion thing. But I'm assuming others have that too. So I just ended up throwing this in here to show how to sort of get over this hook. And I might do a small shorter video just on this because again, I couldn't find anything about it. But this was, if I tried to put this image, the output of this image, directly into Notion, it just would pretty much say it didn't recognize the image. And I think that was, if it's not sitting back the MIME type, maybe specifically of this one, it had the PNG. I don't know. But I ended up using a tool called Cloudinary that I've used for years on and off, and it's a tool that allows you to modify images and videos sort of with an API, and it's super cool. And you can do a bunch of stuff just like with the URL. You'd be like, crop this image, like send a URL of an image, and then say like, crop this image to like 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and it'll do it. And it's really cool, and it's pretty affordable. The cool thing is, what I'm using it for is free. So if you're just sort of using it for like a mod, like I'm literally just turning this file into a PNG, which I'll show you here in a second. Like making sure it's a PNG and storing it there. It doesn't actually cost anything. There's some rate limits, obviously, but it doesn't cost anything. But Cloudinary is a super cool tool to do like image editing. So if you actually needed to like change a graph or change, like you wanted to crop an image or something for your client or get a square image or anything, Cloudinary is super cool. Does a ton of stuff. So we're going back to this HTTP get a file because Cloudinary expects a base64 image data, and it gets the file from our chart image, just the URL. I'm just sending the HTTP, just the URL to the image that I had. And then Cloudinary just takes, base64 encoded data, and then we're getting it from our get a file, which is this our second get a file here. And then I'm just telling what image type I want. So I want the PNG. It's an image source. I'm saying upload it, and then it uploads it, and it returns just the date, like the URL for it. So now there's a public URL I have access to, and I can do something with that. And then that gets us to, actually, let's just run this real quick. Let's unlink this, run it. Let's see what we have so far. So now remember, we go back to Notion. Our file's already here. Otherwise, I would have had add it, click create report. All right, we got it. So we have the AI ran, the data got grouped, and let's see what it came up with. So group data by month. We can see, actually, let's look and see what the input was. So remember, the output was our structured data. And now we can see, so here's our prompt. It's a little bigger. Here's our prompt, all the stuff we looked at already. And then this was the data that got structured. So this is just text. And the thing I love about OpenAI is it's super smart, especially with the new logic versions, models. You can kind of send it, a bunch of junk and it'll figure it out. I'm not recommending it, but technically can. Or at least I found it to work that way. And then I said, structure it. So now it's going through and structuring the data, which is brilliant. So here we have the months and years. Smart enough to move on to the years. And then it has engagement totals, did the sums for me, did the impression totals, did the sums, which will end up matching up to the months. And then the data note, which it looks like March 2024 and March 25 were not included because it was not full data, which is brilliant. So that was the output. So now we can use these results. So again, remember how we used the JSON object and we wanted to have it parse the JSON. So if we wouldn't have done that, it would have come back as just sort of like a JSON string, and we would have had to do some type of like parsing of the JSON in a separate module. So the nice thing is the OpenAI module just has that built in now. So it automatically creates actual properties that we can use. And then if we go to our next model, module, not model, module. We have the data went in, and then the output is our graph. Let's go look at our graph real quick. There's our graph. We have the URL, and then now we went to get a file. So remember, this was just grabbing our URL that we just went to. The URL, the output is going to be a bunch of data, which will look like basics for buffer. And then we upload this buffer, which honestly you don't need to care about. Like, that's cool that that's a buffer, but again, we're using these modules, so you don't have to think about it. Like, I remember you used to have to like code this by hand, like with actual code, and organize this, and it was always a pain. I hated working with files. Let's see. So the output then is, I think, our URL. Yeah, our URL here. So now we can do something with that URL, which and we have a bunch of types here. So the cool, again, the cool thing is Cloudinary. We could have had it, if we structure, we could have had it like crop this, or I don't know why we would do that, but if you needed to crop or make it a circle, like let's say you have grab someone's image from somewhere, you have it do a Google search and grab someone's image and you make it a circle and you make it a 200 pixels by 200 pixels. I can do super cool stuff with the Cloudinary module. All right, so the output of that is our URL, which is great. All right, let's bring it home here. So I'll connect this again. And the final piece was just the monthly impressions summary. Again, these are the building blocks for this stuff. So use this, get creative on what you can do with it. But this is probably where a lot of the magic happens. And I'm at the moment just have it per graph, but I'm starting to already work with giving it more and more data and saying what I care about and have it create the insights for me. I'm obviously checking all of these. I'm obviously overlooking all of this. I actually do a Loom video for each client, running them through this data at the end. But the idea is I don't want to always have to create, like, pushing buttons to create this stuff is super annoying. And most of this is repeat. It's like your data went up, it went down, your posts didn't perform well, or they did perform well, or we spent more money, or we didn't spend more money. And there's going to be some intricacies that we can't get to later on, like within some of that data. And that's where, I'll jump in and do the final 10%, make sure it looks great and send it to the client. But, man, getting 80% of this down has been fantastic. It saved me so much time. So this is where some of the, like, not, there's been magic along the way, the whole way, but this is some extra magic here. So this is where I say, okay, here's a bunch of the data, this prompt, here's a bunch of data, and then just analyze the data and identify key trends, including but not limited to, and then I give it a bunch of examples. I say if there's interesting spikes, if there's major shifts, consistent growth or decline, I give it some specific percentages, and then is there seasonal patterns, anomalies, and the cool thing is you could really put more and more in here, and this is where again I haven't yet, but could put more and more insights in on, generally here's what happens around this time of the year, here's what happens around this time of the year, here's a whole uh, document just on why some of these things might be changing, or tips on how to make them better. Again, you can go crazy on this, but if we look at the rest of the prompt, I'm saying, hey, give me a concise paragraph. This is probably my favorite piece for ChatGPT, is these prompts, is like, give me a concise paragraph under a specific amount of words, under 40 words, summarizing the most important trends, and then give it a bunch of examples. This is stuff that I probably actually would write. That I kind of explain things. And the idea is really just that it's highlighting the data. And then again, it's up to me right now to come in as the expert and say, here's why I think this has changed, most likely changed. I'll go into top posts, their posts, and the team will look at impressions per post and comments, engagement, all these different things, and say why this stuff happened. But again, a lot of this was just like moving the data around and pushing the buttons to paint in the what. And then I just feed it the data. So this was just remember our month data and our monthly impression data. We're just focused on impressions in this module. Remember our monthly impression data. So I just feed it to it. And again, OpenAI is smart enough to get it. So this is just the comma separate data. It's super smart, and it creates those nice little blurbs. And the final one is just putting it back in Notion. So if you're familiar with Notion, they have a great API. This was a little tricky. There's some more advanced stuff I had to do for Notion specific. I'm not going to get into in this video, maybe a future video, because it was a pain in the butt, like actually calling the Notion API and doing custom API requests just to do some features that weren't built into Make but were available within Notion. So I might do another video on that. But this really just sticks with the basic stuff. So it says add a what are those? What are these called? In object block. Add a block to the page, or an object. Do they call them objects? I forget what they call them. Add an object. I guess object. Add a content object. Add a content object. I want it to be an image. Here's the URL. The cool thing is once I give it the URL, it actually uploads to Notion. It's no longer the URL on Cloudinary. So technically, you could go and delete those images on Cloudinary afterwards. I see here's a paragraph, and then here's a result I just got for the interesting observation about the data. And you can style it in different ways. But that's kind of it. And then it puts it in there. So let's actually run the full. Let's run the full thing here. So let's run it. Push our button. And let's watch the magic happen. All right, looks like it's done. So let's see what just happened. So we've already run through the first parts of these. So we'll assume kind of everything ran its course. So should we look at this final step? So we had the Cloudinary URL. We had our monthly impressions. So if you remember, the prompt we sent it was, you're an expert data analyst. Here's a bunch of things you should look at. The output, the brilliance of ChatGPT is it created an amazing observation about the data. So I love these, especially when our clients do really, really cool graphs, which I would say most of the clients do really, really cool graphs, like perform really, really well, and they all look like up and to the right. We get this like, before, uh, then it then fell 32% June before nearly 800% leap in July. Like that sounds very cool and dramatic. But then and then, then another gain and then steady rises. So it's, you know, but that's a fantastic observation. So again, we could have added much more to this and like given tips, given ideas if we would have given it more data and asked it more questions. But this is really just sort of to give an idea. And this is what I've been using in like the full presentation just to for me to run through it and to get an idea of probably what happened around that time, especially if they had some type of viral post or something on LinkedIn. So now let's actually look at the page. So let's see what happened. And look what we have here. So we have our section. It created our graph, which is our image. This is now like a Notion, actual Notion. I'd upload it to Notion, which is nice. And then it threw our text under here. So again, the one I'm using um, has 15 maybe of these like graphs and blocks, and we show a bunch of different data. So I really just wanted to run through the first or just run through one so you could get an idea of all the building blocks. But if you look at this, most of these were the same. It's like get data, aggregate the data, create a graph, upload get the image, add some type of observation. This one, some of these are a little different because some of these are just straight up. I think these are like top posts, top followers, but sky's the limit on this. And you break these into separate modules. I just did this massive module just because I think I was running through it quickly originally when I built it. So hopefully this was helpful. If you are loving automation and AI, please find one of my other videos somewhere around here.